Right now is Emily Jane Fox, senior reporter with Vanity Fair. U.S. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of New York. He sits on the House Judiciary Committee. Thank you, Congressman. Phil Rucker is a co-author of that report in the Washington Post I've been reading from. And Paul Butler is a former federal prosecutor. A simple private transaction, Congressman. I want to talk to you about that because he's talking about payoffs to two women in the midst of a campaign that his own lawyer says were basically a campaign expense to keep these two people quiet by catching and killing their stories, upwards of about $250,000, a lot of money, maybe up to $500,000. What do you make of that claim that it's just a private transaction, business transaction in the middle of a campaign to shut up these people that said they had affairs with him?
Well, that's another silly, nonsensical statement by the President of the United States of America. What's important to note here is that these court filings were put forth by the Southern District of New York, not the special counsel. So this is the Trump Justice Department claiming that the President of the United States during the campaign defrauded the American people. This is as serious as it gets. But that said, we still have to allow the process to play itself out. Let the Southern District of New York complete its investigation. Let the special counsel, Bob Mueller, complete its investigation. Let them report to the Department of Justice, the American people, and then we can decide to proceed. And in the interim, we're just going to continue to focus on our For the People agenda, lowering health care costs, increasing pay, cleaning up the mess and corruption in Washington, D.C.
You know, let's go to Phil Rucker of the Post. You cover the White House. You're the White House chief. It seems to me Trump's defense is that schoolyard behavior, the kid on the schoolyard. No matter what the facts are, he figures if he can pee on the opponent, if he can call Dick Blumenthal, the senator, attack him for his Vietnam record or whatever, if he can make it personal with nicknames, he doesn't need lawyers. That seems to be his approach now.
Yeah, I think that's right, Chris. He has this undying faith in his own ability to drive that message. The problem is when Mueller comes out with a report, there are going to be facts in that report. There's going to be a narrative that's meticulously detailed based on 2 years of an investigation, and Trump may end up needing more than just his instincts and messaging abilities to beat back against those facts. And that's why so many of his allies, especially on Capitol Hill, are concerned with the lack of preparation inside the White House for what's to come.
Well, Trump could have good reason to fear what comes next in the Cohen case. As you said, Phil, the New York Times reports that what the prosecutors did not say in Mr. Cohen's sentencing memorandum is that they have continued to scrutinize what other executives in the president's family business may have known about those crimes. The incoming Democratic chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff, said that Trump could be the first former president, when he becomes a former president, to serve time in jail. Let's watch.
There's a very real prospect that on the day Donald Trump leaves office, the Justice Department may indict him, that he may be the first president in quite some time to face the real prospect of jail time.
And the incoming Democratic chair of the committee responsible for drafting articles of impeachment, the Judiciary Committee, that's Congressman Jerry Nadler of the West Side of New York here, said Trump's knowledge of those payments could be an impeachable offense. Let's watch Jerry Nadler.
If it's proven, are those impeachable offenses?
Well, they would be impeachable offenses. Whether they are important enough to justify an impeachment is a different question, but certainly they'd be impeachable offenses because even though they were committed before the president became president, they were committed in the service of fraudulently obtaining the office. But the fact of the matter is that what we see from these indictments and charging statements is a much broader conspiracy against the American people.
Paul, let me analyze this history, the precedent on this as a professor right now. Is it provable, is it now precedent, that if you spend money in a PR capacity to cover up a sexual affair, is that a campaign expense? Is that established law now? Because I wonder about that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think a judge would find that if a candidate pays hush money to his mistresses to try to get elected president, that counts as a campaign donation. That's a thing of value, and therefore it must be reported. There's a limit. Under the federal campaign law, the maximum contribution from an individual is $2,700. According to the Mueller sentencing memorandum, Michael Cohen got $420,000 for covering up the payments to the mistresses.
But under Buckley and Vallejo, doesn't the president or any candidate have a right to spend any amount on their own behalf, though? I don't like the law, but isn't that the law? Paul?
A person can spend his own money, but you can't give money to somebody else and make it look like it's their transaction. So you're right, Chris. Intent is going to be very important, but we have both Michael Cohen and President Trump lying about the purposes of these payments for months and months until their lies are uncovered by Robert Mueller. So this consistent lying shows what prosecutors call consciousness of guilt. They knew that they were doing something wrong, and importantly, in this Mueller, actually the federal prosecutors in New York, say that Trump directed and coordinated these payments. So if we think about this as another kind of organized crime, Michael Cohen is just the consigliere. Donald Trump is the Don.
Let's talk about this as a National Enquirer story, because they were the magazine that basically caught and killed the story. But let's put it all together. When Donald Trump ran for president, he got caught up in that Access Hollywood tape, which people like Reince Priebus thought would kill his campaign. In fact, he was ready to walk. And a lot of people said, this is awful. He's talking about how he could do anything he wanted to women, sex, do whatever he wanted with a complete impunity because he's a celebrity, a big shot. So now we find out that he was acting that way. He thought he could have these alleged affairs, we'll say alleged, but he was paying money to keep them quiet, paying a lot of money, but he had a lot of money, and he still does. And he's paying off these, using a magazine to buy these stories and kill them to cover up his sexual behavior. Okay? So it's, to me, ironically, because in Washington we say what goes around comes around. I said this on Friday. Isn't it ironic that Trump is now having to pay for it? He's got to pay for that, what he did in his attitude. Because his attitude, expressed in the Access Hollywood tape, is exactly his attitude.
You could call it irony or you could call it karma. This is something that, as the president said today, he wanted to be a simple and private transaction. But the way the universe has worked, this has been anything but simple, and it has become the most public and possibly the most damning story of his entire presidency. It is something that could potentially land him as an unindicted co-conspirator in this case against Cohen.
Well, what do you make of the fact that it's the New York up here? I'm in New York once in a while, every couple of weeks. And here I am in New York. And this isn't the deep state, a bunch of bureaucrats down in D.C. It's not a bunch of liberals down there. It's a bunch of prosecutors, hard-nosed prosecutors in the Southern District of New York, which is sort of Rudy Giuliani country. And now the president's being nabbed, that's a great word for it, nabbed by those guys.
These are not only people home city, people in the Southern District of New York, but this is his Justice Department as well. So yes, they are New Yorkers, but they belong to his Justice Department. These are not people who are part of the witch hunt necessarily. Yeah. These are people who are in his own government. Let
me go to the Congressman. By the way, congratulations, Congressman, on your role. You got a big role in the Democratic Party now. I know all about it. I'm watching your career. I've spotted you. You are on your way. Congratulations. You may be Speaker at some point fairly soon. Who knows? But let me ask you about, do you think you can actually impeach a president for basically covering up sexual misbehavior? I mean, we had this with Clinton to some, well, yeah, everything's different in life, but it was somewhat related. And it never seemed right that would be the basis for throwing a guy out of the presidency to a lot of certainly progressives and middle-of-the-roaders and journalists, some cases. It seemed to be a witch hunt, to use a phrase used lately. How do you impeach a president for a sexual misconduct covered up, even if it is illegal? Your thoughts? Is it appropriate to do that?
Yeah, I think we have to proceed carefully as it relates to impeachment because it is the ultimate political death penalty put into the Constitution for extraordinary circumstances. Now, it may be the case that down the road, once the Mueller investigation has concluded and the facts are presented to the American people, all options at that moment may be on the table, but that's hypothetical at the moment. We do know that the president has conducted himself like an organized crime boss, woefully inappropriate. There were electoral consequences, I believe, for some of his inappropriate behavior as a result of the blue wave that took place on November 6th, Democrats picking up 40 seats, as well as seats at the state level across the country. And we'll see what happens over the next 2 years. But the right thing to do is to let Bob Mueller be Bob Mueller, let the Southern District of New York, professional prosecutors led by Republican appointees complete their work before we as Democrats in the House decide how best to proceed.
Well, like a crime boss. Anyway, thank you. Former FBI Director James Comey was asked this weekend by Nicole Wallace if the president is effectively an unindicted co-conspirator after being implicated in making those illegal payoffs through Michael Cohen for the two women. Let's watch.
Is the President of the United States right now an unindicted co-conspirator? I don't know. Not in the formal sense that he's been named in an indictment where you can actually say that this defendant and named others or others by pseudonym conspired together, and that's how you formally name someone as an unindicted co-conspirator. But if he's not there, he's certainly close, given the language in the indictment, in the filing, that the crimes were committed at his direction.
If Trump wasn't the president and someone went to court in the Southern District of New York, sponsored information that they directed a crime, what would happen to that person?
Well, that person would be in serious jeopardy of being charged.
You know, Phil, you cover politics like I cover it, and the irony is the way in which this whole case has begun to sort of simulate what happened with Clinton. Clinton was investigated for something called Whitewater, which was a dry hole. Nothing came of it. Then it had switched over to Paula Jones somehow, and then Paula Jones flipped over to Monica Lewinsky, and he got in trouble for lying about Monica Lewinsky, about covering up a sexual relationship. Here we have a president investigated for a Russian connection and then obstruction of justice, part of that, flipping over, ending up with a discussion this past weekend about covering up, lying about, an affair, a couple of affairs. What do we make of that under our political system? That this is the way this is how we rock and roll these days.
Yeah, well, Chris, it's not the first time that the cover-up would be worse than the alleged crime. The president is in a heap of trouble here, and he tweeted on Friday. He tried to claim, look, these court filings, there were 3 of them in the span of a couple of hours Friday night, that they totally clear him as the president, and that is just not true. I mean, the president is now implicated in a federal felony related to the Southern District of New York case in New York. Translate
when he says, it clears me. What does that mean to anybody else on the planet when he says something, when he has all this damaging evidence about him paying off these women through a circuitry through the National Enquirer ownership and all caught on paper, and it's Dale, and he says that clears me. What kind of a translation would you give that? What is Trump saying to anybody who's listening? It clears me.
Well,
is he just talking to his 40% who will believe anything he says?
Exactly. He's trying to create an alternate reality. He's been doing this for some time with regard to the investigation, and it's his strategy to continue to do that. And he feels like he can use his megaphone, his Twitter handle, to communicate directly to his supporters, to tell them what to believe. And they're banking on, and his advisors are banking on those tens of millions of Americans out there to believe him. So when he says he's totally cleared, they will think he's totally cleared.
I guess it's like the Germans believe that the name who we never can quote or never mention said that Poland invaded Germany. That's why World War II started. Poland invaded Germany. Remember? He was able to get away with that baby. Anyway, thank you, Emily Jane Fox. Great reporting as always. U.S. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, we're watching your greatness, sir. I think you're on the way up. You're a leader, and that's great. The Democrats need leaders. Phil Rucker, I mean it.